Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Sergeant at Arms. So, this week's installation is about turnover in the White House. And so, in the last month or so, there have been a number of high profile turnovers in President Trump's cabinet. Um, First, I think it was Gary Cohn, who was National Economic Advisor. He resigned, and his replacement was Larry Kudlow from CNBC. The next person was Rex Tillerson, who was Secretary of State, and his replacement is going to be, or let's hopefully, I should say hopefully, but the nominee is Mike Pompeo. And the most recent one is National Security Advisor was H.R. McMaster, and he resigned, and now John Bolton is taking that position. So I guess the first thing that I want to kind of point out is one of the things that Trump talked about when he was running was, you know, as business people, we can run this country like it's a business and run it better than the politicians and career government officials. I don't think he's making good on that. I don't think he's making good on that at all. Because the fact is, you can't run the government like you run a business. They're two different entities and they run very differently. Because the things you can do in business, you cannot do in the government. And some of his cabinet secretaries are realizing that now. Like, you can't have an expense account the way and use it in the government the way you use it in private industry. Can't do it. Because those are government funds, and a lot of that money comes from the voters and the taxpayers, and you cannot be irresponsible with their money. When you're in private business, you do whatever you want with your money. So that's problem number one. So there have been some problems with that across his administration, and we're seeing that unfold now, and it continues to unfold. But the other part of that is, so he brings in Cohn, who was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. He brings in Rex Tillerson, who's the former CEO of ExxonMobil. And these are people who have strong backgrounds in business and economics. Great. Well, I think the problem is Donald Trump is used to being the CEO in charge, and so he's not used to listening to other business people tell him what to do. He's used to being in negotiations with them when that's not what this is supposed to be. If these people are in his cabinet, they're supposed to be advising him and he's supposed to be taking their advice. Now, in this case, as Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson was actually doing the right things. As National Economic Advisor, Cohn was saying the right things and trying to get the president to go in the right direction, and he wouldn't do it. So, he had threatened to resign a couple of times before and finally said, you know what, I'm not going to threaten anymore. I'm actually going to do it. And good for him, because he was just beating his head against the wall. And Tillerson, it had been downhill because he really was trying to find the peace in diplomatic relations, and that's not what Donald Trump is looking for. So those two, sad to see him go because, they were voices of reason in the White House, just like H.R. McMaster. H.R. McMaster did an interview where he said, we still need some voices of reason because, sometimes the president doesn't really think about the repercussions of a lot of things that happen, and he does what he wants to do, and we all know that. And what you need is people who have the voice of reason on their side, and that's what they had. And I remember him saying, if we don't have that, then we don't know what's going to happen in the White House. Well, I guess we're going to find out now. The last person that's of interest to me is this whole John Bolton thing. Now, John Bolton worked for Bush 41, and he was the ambassador to the UN temporarily. So it was like a year, and it was just during recess. And at least from what I can remember, the reason that he didn't stay in that position is because there was some speculation that he couldn't get confirmed by Congress. That makes sense to me, and it's only because that was around the time when I was reporting in Washington, and maybe a little bit after that. And I recall him being kind of reactionary, like a mad scientist. And I mean, he looks the part, so he looks like a mad scientist. And some of the things that he does politically and some of the positions he has politically are things that you would expect from a mad scientist. So I don't know how I feel about going into him as the National Security Advisor, because I've heard people say he's very hawkish about defense. And so President Trump is fairly hawkish as well. But then again, he goes back and forth so much. Bolton will be exactly what Donald Trump wants him to be, and that is, let's go to war, let's stay in this for the fight. Um, and so I have my concerns about that, but you know what? I'm willing to leave that to Congress to figure out whether he should stay in that position or not. I'm going to leave that to them because at this point, there's just been so much scrutiny over Donald Trump's cabinet that Congress is not going to have any choice but to step in at some point and say, this is getting a little out of control because he's had a lot of turnover. And so moving forward, I guess we just have to figure out, who the good people are and who the bad people are. There's some speculation about John Kelly, who's his chief of staff, that he keeps saying, I'll resign if you want me to. That's just a recipe for disaster. He's going to be resigning soon as well. And then there's the speculation that Donald Trump may say, well, you know what, I don't need a chief of staff. There was a period of time when John Kennedy didn't have a chief of staff, a long period of time. And so Donald Trump may try that. I can see that being something that he might want to try, just because he thinks he's invincible and he can take care of it himself. Okay, so let's stay tuned. That's kind of the latest of what's happening in the White House. I'm still trying to tweet about these things. I'm still hoping that you leave me comments and tweet with me about the things that you think are important, because you're the voters, and you're the taxpayers. And so these are the things that we need to hold the Democrats and the Republicans accountable for, and we really need to be holding the White House accountable for these kinds of things, like who's making the decisions, and if they're good people, they're making decisions, why are you firing them? So tweet me SGTATARMSUSA, tweets, comments, all of the above, and I will close this installation of the Sergeant at Arms. See you next time.